the biggest mistake would be to continue with the status quo, as if nothing had changed. The SDGs imply a lot of lessons learned from the past. We have learned that the Sustainable Development Goals need to apply to all countries, that the challenges are just too big for just developing countries to apply to tackle on their own. So it's a universal agenda. We need to build in sustainability into the whole agenda. That was an add-on in the MDG process. It was considered not so important. Now we realize that the planet has boundaries, and we need to integrate that into our thinking of Sustainable Development Goals. We need also to make sure that we focus as much on the how question as the what. We had goals in the MDGs. It was a minimalist approach. Now it's a complex, ambitious agenda, but at least we have goal 17, which focuses on the partnerships and both financial and non-financial means of implementation. And there, we're used to thinking of development in terms of financial flows, ODA, etc., other forms of development finance. But now we realize that it's just as important to focus on the policies, good policies, and the governance arrangements, and those are integrated into the SDGs in Goal 16, for instance, in Goal 17, but throughout the SDGs. So I think also we need to ensure that there is stakeholder involvement. Before, it was very much a top-down approach. Governments were in the lead. Actually, the international organizations were sort of pushing. Now, there's been a huge consultation. We need to continue the momentum of that, involving civil society, involving private sector, involving academia. They can help inform the agenda. They can help support the implementation process. They have access to people who are affected by development challenges, and they can feed that information upwards. So that's very important. And then maybe lastly, we need to change mindsets on what hinders or enhances achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. Policies that we implement at home, even the advanced countries, in the emerging economies, in the developing countries, those impact not only on our own populations, but also externally, like climate change, carbon emissions. That's, I think, in a nutshell. I think it will be important for countries to identify some priorities to begin with, because not all countries will have the same starting point. Not all countries are facing the same challenges. There are some countries that don't have an ocean, they're landlocked. There are other countries that are not producing carbon emissions to a great extent. So obviously there are certain goals that they will not need to worry about too much. But one has to be a bit cautious in taking this approach to prioritize, because the whole agenda is very interlinked. All the goals are very interlinked. So when you take actions in one area, for instance on gender equality, that can have impacts on many other goals and targets. So it's important to keep that in mind. There's the goals and targets are much more interlinked now than they were under the MDGs. And so, for instance, one way to enable other SDGs would be, for instance, access to electricity can reinforce water pumping, which can reinforce irrigation systems. Electricity can also enable education if electricity is required in rural households, for instance, to do homework at night. So there are many, many sort of steps along the way. But on the other side, the dis-synergies, boosting consumption for growth can counteract waste reduction or climate mitigation, or it can reduce options for energy access. So there are pluses and minuses, interlinkages and trade-offs that need to be managed and to be built into the policy-making process.